Good evening, welcome to the program. As the dust settles on Labor's internal leadership dramas, the Prime Minister is insisting that the party is now unified. But as the government now embarks on the difficult task of shaping the May budget, we're not exactly seeing unity amongst government MPs on one of the key savings measures that is clearly under consideration, a tax increase for superannuation. All this while the issue of asylum seekers once again comes onto the agenda, with more and more boat arrivals and another tragedy at sea this week, with 2 people drowning after their vessel was hit by rough seas just off Christmas Island. To look at these issues this evening and the events of the week, we are joined by Labor Senator Matt Thistlethwaite, newly promoted in the reshuffle this week to Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs and Multicultural Affairs. Rowan Dean is a columnist with the Australian Financial Review. Richard Dennis is the Executive Director of the Australia Institute, and Liberal MP Kelly O'Dwyer. Welcome to you all. Let's start on the issue of asylum seekers. We have seen in the first few months of this year more than twice, almost 3 times the number of people arriving as in the first 3 months of last year. That's despite now having offshore processing in place in Nauru and Manus Island. Senator, let me start with you. Do you think the current policy is working?
Well, if you look at some of the areas where the boats are coming from, we've been successful. Sri Lanka
in particular.
Sri Lanka, about 1,000 people who were essentially economic migrants have been returned, and that's providing an effective deterrent. There are challenges with some other regions, but what we did with this policy was we tried to take some of the heat, the politics out of it, by referring it to an expert panel headed by Angus Houston. And they came up with a series of recommendations, 22 of them, that the government is seeking to implement them. But they made the point, and this is the key to the whole policy, you can't cherry pick individual elements of it. It's a package as a whole, and if it's going to work, you need to implement all of the package. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to implement a key aspect of the package, and that is the Malaysia People Swap Agreement. And
I know that's what the panel recommended. They also recommended some improvements to that Malaysian agreement that haven't taken place yet. But do you really think, improved or not, adding Malaysia to the offshore processing options would stop the boats?
Well, it's about providing an effective deterrent, and many of these people come through Malaysia and they come through Indonesia. Now, if they go and visit a people smuggler, and it's well known that if you get on a boat in Malaysia, you're going to end up back in Malaysia, then you're taking away the product.
But only 800 people. Only 800 people would be sent back there, and based on the current numbers in the last few weeks, that'd take a week to fill up.
Yeah, but why would you want to risk being one of the 800? It's about informing the community.
Sheer percentage, because the prospect of being sent there is only, what, a fraction?
Yeah, but if you're one of the 800, you're going to end up back in Malaysia. So the incentive is sending the message to the region through that policy, and that's what we're trying to do. Now, we've been unable to implement that element of the policy, and I think that's a great shame, because there's been a history in this country of the executive level of government having the discretion to implement its policy when it came to border protection and immigration policy. That's something that Labor supported in opposition, where in 2001 when the Tampa came, Kim Beazley supported John Howard on that. We haven't had the same respect from the opposition on this issue.
Well, let's ask Kelly O'Dwyer. We did have this debate last year, but now that Nauru and Manus Island, which the Coalition argued for years and years should be reinstated, have been reinstated, and the boats are coming in increased number, and sadly another drowning this week. Does that change your view at all on Malaysia?
Well, look, I think the important thing to note is that we have seen this dramatic increase in numbers as a result of the government's policy to dismantle the previous coalition government's border protection mechanisms.
Yeah, but they put it back in place now.
But no, they haven't. They haven't included things like temporary protection visas.
Well, they have bridging visas, which are pretty similar.
Well, they don't have the temporary protection visas as we had them under the previous coalition government, and they have quite clearly stated that they are not going to turn boats around when it is safe to do so. So they're 2 of the 3 elements of the package that we said were critically important.
Okay, well, if that's critically important, do you believe you can turn boats back to Indonesia when Indonesia says you can't?
Well, you know, where it's safe to do so, it has been demonstrated that this has worked in the past, but it is a package, and I think the critical point here is this. The Prime Minister herself said when she was the Shadow Minister that another boat, another policy failure. There have now been, under this government, more than 600 boats that have arrived, carrying more than 34,000 people. Now, this is quite unprecedented. The UNHCR recently released figures. The numbers of people seeking asylum throughout the world are 20% less than they were during the Howard government years. And yet, in Australia, we are seeing an increase in the number of people seeking asylum. It's more than 5%
back to the question.
More than,
why
than
not
the global
Malaysia?
average.
Why not now look at Malaysia?
Well, Malaysia, I think you heard directly from Matt on this point, and that is that it's quite clear. It's capped. It's 800 people. Once you actually get beyond that cap, I don't really understand what the government's policy is. More to the point, the government actually hasn't put its legislation to the Parliament. It hasn't fulfilled the recommendations.
If that's the objection to it, Nauru and Manus Island are capped as well. You can't send infinite number of people there. There are limits. And they've already done your government.
There are protections, though, under the Houston report. The government have said, we want to implement the Houston report. The Houston report very clearly said that there needed to be extra protections in place if you are actually going to have people in Malaysia. Now, the government has done nothing about that. In fact, the government is hiding behind this like a shield. It's doing nothing about this issue, and it is pretending that it would do something if only it could. It's not bringing legislation forward, and we know the reasons why. So many people on the government side don't support it. They don't think it's a realistic solution, and they also find it quite bizarre that the government is actually proposing this solution, given that it did dismantle the Howard government's protections in the past.
Well, I think Labor's crossed that threshold. Even the likes of Doug Cameron now do support offshore processing, including Malaysia.
We don't know who would cross the floor, though.
Well, I think. Do you know any? Are you just saying this? Do you know anyone who would cross the floor?
Well, it's never been put to a test, and clearly people have made some very strong statements.
I just think if Doug Cameron's willing to vote for it, it's pretty clear that most in Labor
I wouldn't hold out Doug Cameron as the example.
Kelly, you mentioned some of the extra condition that the expert panel put in place. If they were put in place, would the coalition support Malaysia?
This is a matter for the government. The government actually hasn't brought forward the legislation, and it doesn't
what's
intend
more,
to.
Yeah, but
what's more, Senator,
we can't get it through the Parliament.
The immigration.
The
immigration minister told us on Sky this afternoon that in the time he's been minister, he hasn't yet spoken to the Malaysian government about the improvements that the Houston Committee recommends.
He hasn't travelled to Malaysia. Hasn't gone there. We don't know when he's going there.
There's clear stonewalling from the opposition on this issue.
So you need to wait for the opposition before you can improve the deal.
No. Well, I mean, we got a clear indication from them that it wouldn't be worthwhile. That was the approach that they took last time. There's also the issue of the Greens. Now we've got to get it through the Senate as well. But if we had some cooperation,
you're in government with the Greens.
Let's bring in Rowan and Richard.
You actually have
no, they haven't supported us on this policy at all.
Richard Dennis,
they teamed up with you to oppose it in the Senate.
The issue of offshore processing, the left condemned it for so long, and then after a number of tragedies at sea, most in Labor at least embraced it. What do you think now, 6 months on from Nauru and Manus Island being reopened? We have seen an increase in boat arrivals. Is it working?
Well, I think last time I was here, or perhaps the time before, I heard exactly this conversation with two different Labor and Liberal MPs. But since then, we saw Chris Bowen and Scott Morrison lean across the dispatch boxes and shake hands on the day when the no advantage test was passed. And since that time, since we've been harsher on asylum seekers, arguably than even the Howard years, I mean, now, even after you've been granted refugee status, you can be held indefinitely in incarceration. John Howard never did that. So we've got the no advantage test. We're not reuniting families anymore. We're holding people in indefinite detention, and the numbers are going.
Community on a bridging visa.
But the numbers are going through the roof. So how harsh do you have to be? Now, to quote Malcolm Fraser, and let's remember what he said. Do we have to chop the heads off some girls and send them back to Afghanistan in order to send a signal? I mean, the harshness, we shook hands, you guys shook hands over the dispatch box. Look, today we've done it, we've made it harsher than ever before, and it's failed. It is absolutely failed.
Rowan, it is pretty hard to see the current policy as a success.
Now, the current, congratulations to Matt on his new promotion, by the way. And I can see why he got it, because you came out with all that stuff, that potted history of your party's approach with a straight face, and well done, as you should. But there's an alternate narrative, as it were, which is basically that every single decision this government has made on this issue, they have made a mistake with. They've got it wrong, they've fumbled it, they've dropped the ball, they haven't had a coherent thought, they've flip-flopped. And the bottom line line is that the people smugglers sitting overseas, they have a business to run. There's a simple choice. Go to Australia, it's open season, we'll get in quick. It's like the January sales, get in quick before the door shuts in September when a coalition government comes in.
These are people who are fleeing persecution, and you can make it as tough as you want. Why is it going up? Why is it going up?
Because
why is it going
business.
up?
It's business.
Why do people want to go on that business?
Because this government has made it so easy to get in.
Well, the Houston report that we've heard so much about said don't tow them back. The Navy won't do it.
And the Houston report hasn't solved anything.
Nothing's going to solve.
Classic Labor government to go and hand it off to an expert panel and say, you go and solve it because we don't know how to.
Does anyone really think that domestic politics is going to resolve a global problem?
Yes.
Really?
No.
These parties...
It's to do with ticker. It's to do...
What's going to solve this?
People smugglers have already said, one of them came out yesterday and said, actually, during the John Howard years, we knew we couldn't get in, so we didn't bother. We knew that this government was a soft touch. We're in. We're going to keep coming in until the government changes. When the government changes, it's going to be tough for the government. They're going to have, for the Liberals, for the coalition, they're going to have a really tough time of it. But the people smugglers know, OK, the game has changed and you will see a decrease. It may not be immediate, it won't be quick, but you will see a decrease because it's a business model, like any model.
So why has it gone up since the no advantage test
Because the doors are open, because the government have done nothing to actually solve the problem.
The door?
Every decision they've made, they've tripped over themselves.
But this is the point about the UNHCR figures, which is that there are pull factors. As Rowan's pointing out, there are significant pull factors in Australia. Otherwise, how can you explain why in Australia we have 5 times the global average of people seeking asylum?
But Kelly O'Dwyer,
there's always
the reality is there's always going to be a pull factor in Australia being a rich, developed economy.
Canada's gone down by 19%.
Yes.
Canada's actually gone down.
People smugglers don't go around, we'll go here, go here. They make one choice. People make one choice. It's a horrible choice. I agree with you, Richard. It's the most awful choice you can imagine. Where are we going to get on a boat and go and try and get a better life? But they've decided the odds are they will get into Australia.
We in Australia are now holding children in detention on some islands while other children are drowning at sea. We are locking children up to deter other children. It's the fault of the government
policies.
Right, and around the world, every country will tow back the boats and this will work, will it? I mean, there are seasonal factors that describe what happens in the economy. There are structural factors. Different parts of the world have different troubles at different points in time. You can cherry-pick data all you want. People fleeing persecution.
This isn't cherry-picking data. This is UNHCR data.
It goes speak for themselves. No, it doesn't.
Well, the facts speak for themselves.
Let me ask you, Senator, would you be prepared to... I know Labor's done a very big backflip from dismantling offshore processing to now putting it back in place. Would you be prepared to take another step on temporary protection visas?
Well, we've got bridging visas in place at the moment. And the people that are on them are generally single people. They're unaccompanied. And it's not a good life on one of those visas. You're on 89% of the New Start allowance, which there's a debate about the adequacy of that in our economy at the moment.
But the temporary visa means you're only guaranteed refugee status for 3 years.
Yeah, and you're not allowed work rights. It's about providing the disincentive. This policy is all aimed at providing an adequate disincentive for people to get on those boats.
But it's not working.
We've seen what happened on... But as I go back to before, we haven't been able to implement the whole policy. And the expert panel made it quite clear.
So Malaysia would change everything?
Malaysia would make a big difference. It would make a big difference.
Let me just ask you...
Can I just say, the problem with towing back the boats is Indonesia will not cop it. Indonesia won't cop it. So the question that Kelly and the Liberal Party have to answer is, when you turn them back, what happens to these people? They're on the high seas. You've got women and children on unsafe boats. What happens to them? No one's been able to answer that question.
Well, no, the point is, if you actually have people who are on vessels and you turn those vessels around, if it's safe to do so, and only if it's safe to do so, they go back to the port from which they came.
Which is Indonesia, and Indonesia's saying, no, we'll turn them around, don't bring them back here.
No. The point is, you have to provide a very clear message to people who are engaged in people smuggling. And as Ron points out, this is a business. It's a business model. People actually pay very significant amounts of money.
Just on the practicality of this, how does it work?
It's been done before. It actually was done under the coalition government.
And it resulted in things like the CFX tragedy and people drowning.
Can you say that with a straight face? There have been more than 1,000 people who have died as a result of the government's policies, which I think is a national disgrace.
Yeah, but we haven't deliberately turned people around on the high seas.
People have died. Tell that to the people who've died. Oh, it's not our fault.
And that's why we need a disincentive for them to make those dangerous journeys. Look, I'm a surf life saver. I've been a surf life saver for 28 years. There is nothing more harrowing than seeing those photos of Christmas Island a couple of years ago, where a wealth of people drowned, young kids. Now, I've got some sympathy for people who are coming from and fleeing persecution, but you just can't have a policy that allows people who are innocent people and don't know the dangers, who are conned into taking these journeys, to get on the high seas on rickety boats that won't survive the trip. And we need an adequate policy. We tried to take the politics out of this and ask the expert panel, the people that work in this area, to come up with some recommendations, and we're trying to implement them.
But you haven't implemented it, and I think that's the point.
Matt is right. The biggest disincentive, there needs to be a disincentive, but the biggest disincentive will be a change of government. It's that simple.
Will that end the war on drugs as well? Will the incentives?
No.
Why not? Why haven't we cracked the business model of the drug dealers?
It's a completely different question.
Well, why haven't we lock them up? If there's money to be made, you want to crack this.
I know you've forgotten that it did work in the past.
Well, my solution is to stop pretending there's a simple solution.
Okay,
like, just
so
get over yourselves.
Tell us what you would do.
Well,
what would the Greens do?
I don't know what the Greens would do. You should ask the Greens. I've never advised anybody on immigration policy. Why would anyone ask an economist?
Anything. Cheap gag. Cheap gag.
Well, I think a few more economic questions would go hand in handy for both parties at the moment. Look, there is no simple answer, but let's look at the data. Something an economist would do. We got tougher, and the number of people come doubled. That's what happened. It didn't work.
No, that is not correct. When you say we got tougher, you're talking about under this current government after they dismantled everything.
When Bowen
a critical step.
and Morrison leaned over and shook hands and had the no advantage test and have done a whole...
This was the government's initiative.
Let me put this to all of you, and I don't expect any of you will agree, but isn't the reality that the only way we're ever going to see progress on this is if there is genuine bipartisanship? And the two sides aren't that far apart, really. Bridging visas, temporary protection visas. You say you'll turn the boats back to Indonesia, but Indonesia says you can't. You want Malaysia, but the opposition's not going to back that. Look, if you could reach agreement on this, and Australia had a unified position that it could present to the region and to the world, then we might actually get somewhere.
Well, Australia did have a unified position under Keating and Howard, but they agreed, and it worked.
And
we've had
that's true. And the opposition, Labor at the time, cut the government a bit of slack on what we saw as a very important national issue. And the principle of executive government, those that are in power, being able to determine this country's border and immigration policy, was the principle that we rely on. And we've asked the opposition to do the same when we've been in government, and they haven't extended the courtesy. That was what that debate in the parliament that led up to the establishment of the Houston panel was all about.
The coalition has been consistent from day one through to this current day on policy. We have not changed our position on the policy. The only people who have chopped and changed on policy, who have been entirely inconsistent, going from East Timor to PNG to then talking about Malaysia, has been the government. This is why it's in such a mess.
Okay, there is one new detail that's been put into the policy debate from the opposition recently, and that's in relation to the bridging visas, and there will be many thousands of them that, if you win the election, you'll inherit. People on the bridging visas in the community. Scott Morrison says they should be subject to behavioural protocols. Are you comfortable with that?
So what Scott means by that is that there is a certain standard of behaviour that we would expect of anybody, whether they're in a detention centre, whether they're in the community, and that's fairly standard practice, I would think, that there are certain standards of behaviour you would expect in Australia, and that's all he's been talking about.
So just to be clear here, the behaviour that's expected of those on bridging visas is no different to the behaviour of the rest of the community?
Well, that's right.
So
we live in an Australian community.
Why do you need a behavioural protocol?
Well, as Scott has explained, people who are coming to the country who may not be familiar with the way that our country operates,
like tourists.
It is standard in detention centres to have behavioural protocols, and he's simply saying that should be extended out to people who are also going to be in the community.
What about tourists?
So why not just say to them, these are the laws that you must abide?
Well, I think in essence that is exactly what is being said.
So why do you need protocols on top of that?
Well, as I said, it's having the same behaviour in detention centres and outside of detention centres.
But hang on, I'm confused. If it's no more than what our Australian laws are, is it any more than that?
Well, look, I mean, Scott can explain, as he's the Shadow Minister, exactly what determines the behavioural protocols. My understanding of what has been said is that it is about the standard of behaviour, the values that we have as Australian citizens, what we would expect of people in our community. Behavioural protocols are quite normal, apparently, in detention centres. He's simply saying that this should also be reflected in community detention as well.
OK, and you're completely comfortable with what he's talking about there?
This is absolutely coalition policy.
That you support?
What's coalition policy?
That you support?
Well, of course, it's coalition policy.
Good, OK. We'll take a quick break, then come back and look at the issue of superannuation. Stay with us.
The Good Guys huge Easter bargain hunt. A milk cheese 6.5 kilo top loader $3.75 and an espresso new coffee machine $2.49, $1.89 after cash back. Check online for more bargains and local store hours.
Look, lunch is over, so this is over.
Whoa, is this a breakup? Is this a breakup?
What did we talk about?
No emotional attachments. It was only lunch. I just thought we would stay together for...
Don't make this any harder.
Oh, I'm not leaving.
Break up with clingy food.
That went well.
Help keep teeth clean and healthy.
I'm enjoying your holiday.
Don't let the major banks and their low-interest accounts steal your savings dreams. Steal them back with a Rabo Direct high-interest savings account. Start earning market-leading rates today at rabodirect.com.au.
We know one jump can put almost 1 tonne of pressure on your knees. To help keep them moving longer, we've developed potent krill formulas that help reduce joint inflammation and provide temporary relief from arthritis. Nature's Own Potent Krill Oils.
With new bars, restaurants and entertainment, there's something new for every one of you. Crown Resorts.
60% of kids don't get enough calcium. Milk is a great source.
And I love mine with Milo because it boosts the calcium of milk by 70%.
Find out more at milo.com.au.
Masterfood soaps and spices. Why cook when you can create?
Welcome back to the program. We're joined this week by Matt Thistlethwaite, Labor Senator and Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs as of this week. Rowan Dean is a columnist with the Australian Financial Review. Richard Dennis, Executive Director of the Australia Institute. And Kelly O'Dwyer, Liberal MP. I want to turn to superannuation and what the government is thinking about doing, likely to do, should do, shouldn't do when it comes to increasing taxes on particularly higher income earners. Let me ask you, Senator, is someone earning $250,000 a year in Western Sydney struggling?
Well, they were the comments that were made by Joel Fitzgibbon. The statistics show that the overwhelming majority of Australians aren't earning that much money.
I think it would be the top 5% or something.
Yeah, that's right. And the aims of our policy are to make the system simpler and fairer, predominantly for middle to low-income workers. And the Henry Tax Review and identified that there was some inequity in terms of the concessions associated with the taxation of superannuation. Anyone on more than $180,000 gets about a 31.5% tax concession, and that's
so that $180,000 figure you've referenced there, do you regard that as a high income earner?
Oh, well, I think that's certainly something that Ken Henry regarded as a high income earner.
I'm asking you.
Well, look, it's all relative, isn't it? People work hard for their remuneration, and I don't begrudge anyone earning a quid. And when you've got families, you've got a mortgage, you've got payments to meet, you know, people, regardless of what their income level is, do work hard to make ends meet.
Yeah, but this is a pretty simple question. Is 180 grand a high income?
Well, in terms of statistics, I suppose it is, because most Australians aren't earning that much money. And what we've tried to do is rebalance the system so that some of the concessions that existed at the high end under the Howard government have been rebalanced to support low-income workers saving, and that's through the low-income superannuation contribution. And we've removed the taxation for about 3.5 million workers and earning under $34,000 a year, predominantly women. About 2.1 million of them are women, and it's aimed at encouraging people to save to meet the challenge of the ageing population.
But do you believe the current superannuation tax rules unfairly benefit those high-income earners?
Look, David, it's budget speculation season. Everyone's talking about what's in and out of the budget, and it won't surprise you to know that I'm not going to speculate on what's in and out.
The current tax system, not what you might do. Is the current tax system fair, or does it unfairly advantage higher income earners?
I think we've reformed the taxation of superannuation and the fairness of the system quite a bit, and I think we've done a good job, and we've done a good job for this reason.
So is it fair now?
I think on balance, you know, we've got most of it right, but there's always room for reform, and the government will assess in the context of the budget whether or not
so is the balance about right, or is there still room for reform?
Look, we've undertaken a lot of reform in this area, and I think we've done a good job because the industry supports the reforms that the government's undertaken.
So is it fair now? Is it fair now or not?
Well, look, I'm not going to speculate on what's going to be. I know you're trying to draw me into.
I'm just asking whether it's fair at the moment.
I think broadly it is fair.
Okay.
Yes. I think
broadly
it is fair, and we've got the balance right on reform, and it's been aimed at encouraging people to save and making the system simpler.
So the system at the moment is fair. Richard Dennis, is it?
No, not at all. Look, let's talk about statistics and relativities. If someone is in Australia, if they're 6'4", they are in the tallest 1% of the population. And if they meet someone who's 7 foot tall, that doesn't make them middle. They're still tall. The fact that there are very tall people doesn't make someone 6'4" middle or average. If you're earning $250,000 a year in Australia, you have very, very high income, very high. The fact that someone earns $1 million does not make you anything like middle or average or, from my point of view, struggling. So let's be really clear. $250,000 is a lot of money. The minimum wage is $32,000. $32,000.
And the average wage is about 70,
no, about 56 is the median income.
Right.
So we're looking here at people earning nearly 5 times the median, and we find it hard as a society to say the simple, the obvious. That's a high income. And the fact that someone else earns $1 million is irrelevant. So it's not, you know, $250,000 is a heap of money. $180,000 is a lot of money.
And does the current system, the superannuation tax system, in your view, unfairly advantage?
Massively. And let's just quote some simple Treasury statistics here. The top 10% of income earners get 1/3 of the tax concessions. The top 10% get 1/3. The bottom 10% gets 0. Not a cent.
Are they Treasury figures?
They're Treasury figures. I'll email them to you. You can pop it up on the website.
I know GetUp's been.
It gets worse. Well, we wrote that report for them.
Yeah. And they're your figures.
No, they're Treasury figures. I just made the Treasury figures comprehensible to humans. Here's the real killer. What Treasury tells us is that if you look at how much we pay a poor person for the age pension, and we look at the tax concessions for people in the top 1%. The top 1% will get twice as much in value from the tax concessions from super than we would ever give someone for the age pension. Let me just be really clear about this. the superannuation concessions for the highest income Australians don't take pressure off the budget. They don't save anyone anything. Not only are we giving away more in concessions than we would give for the age pension, but we're giving it to groups who were never eligible for the age pension. We're pouring tens of thousands of dollars a year into the accounts of people who will never draw an age pension.
But let me ask you this. If you were to remove that or reduce that tax break for the rich when it comes to superannuation, wouldn't they just put that into another a savings vehicle that's going to be tax effective like housing?
I love it. So it's the sort of, do you want a punch in the face or a punch in the guts? These people aren't going to pay tax, apparently. That's the premise.
Well, not when they can negative year a property.
No, the reason they're in super is it's even more tax advantageous. So if we push them into the second biggest tax rort, we'll collect a lot of money. The fact that they're in super so much and lobbying like crazy to get even more in as quick as they can is proof that it's the most tax-effective vehicle around.
Kelly O'Dwyer, based on those figures about the sort of advantage that goes to the top income earners, being every year more than goes to people on the New Start allowance, is there scope for reform? Do you think the current system's fair?
Well, firstly, I mean, I listened to that with great interest. I mean, I think your view, Richard, is that people that you determine to be wealthy people ought to pay even more tax than they're currently paying at the moment.
These are tax concessions that should be removed.
But, you know, that they're not even paying enough tax as it is. I mean, I presume that people who actually legitimately do their tax under the current tax rules, they're not doing anything dodgy. I mean, people actually earn that money.
No, this is the law that we're talking about. This is
the law. We change laws. You make laws in Parliament.
But the point, but I think the essence of your point is, though, that you think that rich people ought to be paying even more than currently exists.
If there were let me make it simple. If there were $45 billion on the table, $45 billion, who would we give it to? Because what the Treasury tells me is that of that $45 billion, we're giving a third to the wealthiest 10% and nothing to the bottom 10%. It's a distributional game, and if you're happy with that, then you should be happy with that. If you want to change that, you should change that.
That's not how the redistribution ultimately works.
Yes, it is absolutely how it works.
Basically, the way that the redistribution of our tax system currently works at the moment is you've got the top 30% of taxpayers actually redistributing their wealth to everybody else in Australian society at the moment. Now, you might say that balance is all right, and maybe
the other point on that analogy, Richard, is who's putting that $45 billion on the table?
Well, that's the income tax scales, and what we do.
So who's contributing to that the most?
Well, obviously high income earners pay higher income tax. That's the progressive income tax system.
That's right.
But, let me make it even clearer for you. If I was 70 years old and I had $10 million in super and I pulled $1 million in super out each year, I would pay zero in tax. Not a cent. And my 10 million grew to 12 million and I would pay zero in capital gains tax. And it gets better.
But are you paying tax throughout your life?
Of course I am.
You would have paid tax
to build up when the money went. You would have paid a fair
I might have inherited it. I might have inherited it.
So what, we should have inheritance taxes too?
Like the Americans.
Yeah,
communists.
No,
I'm saying...
But let me just get back to Kelly O'Dwyer's answer on this. Are you saying that the current system is absolutely fair?
Well, look, what the government has done on superannuation, it has already ripped $8 billion out of superannuation.
Okay, but I just want to find out whether you think it's currently fair.
It is actually changing the superannuation system from year to year. We've seen more than 10 changes to the superannuation system. And the government has actually made significant changes, not only to higher income earners, but also to lower income earners.
And we'll get to your changes on that in a moment too. But do you think the current system's fair?
Well, look, I think, broadly speaking, I think people who earn their money, who actually save for their retirement, ought to have certainty around their savings. I think that people actually do plan for this. If we are trying to encourage people to save for their retirement, to be self-reliant, then what we need to give them is transparency and certainty around how our superannuation system works.
Is it fair? Is the current system fair?
Well, I think, broadly speaking, our system is fair. And I think what it does is it provides stability and it rewards people who work hard and save for their retirement.
And what about people who work hard to earn $32,000 a year?
Yes,
this idea that only high-income earners work hard.
They're not paying as much tax, though.
Yeah. Well, and they're also not getting a cent in tax concessions to help them accumulate these additional savings.
So what they're doing is the government actually made some changes to lower income earners.
And you're going to get rid of them.
No, when it came to co-contributions, they were getting before 2007 they were getting $1,500. The government cut that to $500.
Thank God.
They took more than $3.3 billion out of it.
Now you want to do away with it altogether.
My point is that, no, but what the government has done is the changes that they have linked to low-income earners right now in relation to superannuation is linked to the mining tax. A mining tax that they said was going to actually raise $2 billion. It's raised $126 million so far, and half of that is administration costs. So I don't think we can rely on the government actually making this promise to deliver this.
So when you talk about the need for certainty around retirement incomes and the need for everyone to have some certainty around this, you're saying except for those very low-income earners.
No, what I'm saying is you can't rely on the government's promise around low-income earners. It made this promise before the 2007 election when it promised not to change the $1,500 to $500, and it did it anyway. It broke that promise. I absolutely think it will break their promise on this, and I'll tell you why. Because it is associated with the mining tax revenue.
But just on your
we're saying we've got a low-income superannuation contribution.
People deserve certainty. What about those low-income earners? It doesn't apply to them?
But my point is, this is all fictitious. This is a fictitious...
No, it's not. It's a real policy.
Legislation.
It's a real policy that is there providing a tax concession for low-income workers. And you're going to take it away.
No.
The money doesn't really come from the mining tax. There's not little buckets everywhere.
So the government has actually linked it, though, to the mining tax. The government actually cannot afford to pay for this. So they are making a promise that they have no intention.
But the policy is in place and operating.
It's very simple. The bottom line, Richard talks about $45 billion on the table. That's not yours or yours or yours to play with. That belongs to people who have earned it, and it is theft to take it from them.
Tax is theft.
No, it's not tax. That's income tax. Tax their income. That's where you tax their income.
That's exactly what I'm proposing.
This is an exemption. No, this is their money that they put aside under contract with the government. That would be their money in the future.
Okay, this is important.
So sorry, it's very important.
No one is talking.
Stealing super.
I don't think anyone's talking about taxing.
No one is talking
changing the super rules, changing the concessions from people who have worked all their lives for what they will get in the future. Again, we had a perfectly good bipartisan agreement, very fair to answer your question. It is fair. Don't change it.
The debate at the moment, though, is about taxing the money that's going into there.
Yes.
It's not about taxing the money that's...
Absolutely.
Although it may be a tax on earnings.
It will change.
Once you start fiddling with super, you change the rules, you change the well-established
contribution into it.
When Peter Costello abandoned the high-income earners tax offset, was that fiddling? Was that tinkering? When we've cut all these taxes, no, I didn't hear you guys saying, don't tinker, leave it exactly as it is. So over the last 15 years, we've massively made tax on superannuation, we've made tax on superannuation almost vanish. We've made it far more tax effective, and I didn't hear the industry once saying, don't tinker,
for a very good reason.
Don't tinker.
So that people wouldn't draw off the government in their old age, so that people would look after themselves.
I'm sorry.
Now you're going to change that dynamic.
The facts are clear. We are giving enormous tax concessions to people who have so much wealth they were never going to get the age pension. The idea that they are taking pressure, or the part pension, absolutely the part pension.
You're talking about not just high income earners. The government potentially, we don't know where they're going to draw the line on this.
I'm telling you what exists as
is. The government is potentially going to be very much talking about middle income earners, families.
According to Treasury modelling released 6 weeks ago.
Why on earth would we disincentivise those people?
You just said they'll just go avoid tax on negative.
It's all speculation. It's all speculation. I was in Japan a couple of weeks ago and meeting with members of the Abe government, and the thing that struck me was some junior ministers over there said, we want to come to Australia to study your retirement income system. It's well known as one of the best retirement income systems in the world.
So you shouldn't fiddle with it.
Change it, precisely.
No, but we've got the system. We've got the system broadly right.
So you shouldn't.
And we've done things. Well, hang on. The reforms that we've undertaken over the last couple of years have come about as a result of a comprehensive review of the system, the Cooper Review. Yeah. Jeremy Cooper made these recommendations to make the system
done all that, and
fairer.
as you've acknowledged tonight, it's a fair system.
But this wasn't.
Where's the argument for making any change?
But it's pure speculation, David, at this point in time.
And it's
pure speculation.
So you can sit here honestly tonight and say that all of this is just media speculation, that the government's, not going to do anything?
I can't rule it in, I can't rule it out, because I don't know. You know that. I'm not part of the ERC. I'm not one of the senior economic ministers. They'll be looking at that. They will consult with us on the final decision. And that's the way it works, regardless of who is in government. But I think broadly, our system is a fine system and it works well. And the architecture of the scheme was set up by Labor under the Hawke and Keating years, and it is Labor that delivers reform to the system through increasing the compulsory rate of superannuation from 9 to 12.
Past Labor leaders, from Keating to Martin Ferguson to Simon Crean to Bill Kelty, who today actually wrote an op-ed in the paper decrying this proposed change, a proposed change that the Prime Minister has been very open about. She announced in her press club address in January this year that she was going to make significant changes to superannuation, and she said it was going to be in the budget. So this is not pure speculation. It is something that the government is flying a kite on, which is why there has been such a strong response even from stalwarts of the Labor Party, because they know it's wrong. They know it's wrong to attack people's retirement savings. They know it's wrong to try and ensure that people who want to be self-reliant in their retirement years won't then have the capacity to do that. And they know it's wrong.
Well, at the moment, what we do know, is if if Tony Abbott is elected Prime Minister, that the low-income superannuation contribution will go.
And doesn't exist.
About 3.5 million working will pay more tax. And the other issue is
never got the money.
Tony Abbott, I noticed today, wouldn't pledge to meet Labor's commitment to increase superannuation from 9 to 12%.
Well, he has. I mean, that's just...
But just a final question before we leave this topic, Kelly O'Dwyer. If Labor does increase taxes on super contributions and you win the election, what happens? Will you undo it?
Well, look, we obviously don't even know yet what the government's planning to do. So I'm not going to be talking to you about policies that we will or won't undo. We don't yet know what the government's going to do, but we are saying to them it is the wrong thing to do and they shouldn't do it.
We'll need to take a break. Back with more. Stay with us.
Sporty DNA is now even more evolved. The exhilarating Kazashi. Now with class-leading multimedia satellite navigation. Start your senses.
First home or investment property. A Macquarie mortgage lets you make one of the biggest investment decisions of your life work for you. Talk to your mortgage broker or financial advisor today, or call Macquarie.
Miele washing machines are German engineered and tested to the equivalent of 20 years usage. How do we know? Because the same engineers who design and build them then test them by opening their doors 60,000 times, then running them for the equivalent of once every day for 20 years, through 10,000 hours. So we don't just say Miele washing machines are tested for endurance. We know they are. It's one of the things that make Miele forever better.
Hi there, Kitty from Progressive Car Insurance. Here to let you know that we're 100% online, which means less overheads for us and more savings for you.
Ready to save? Visit progressiveonline.com.au.
Light and Easy's virtually changed my life. I wouldn't be as fit and healthy and living life the way I am at the moment without it. It wasn't like diet food, it just tasted great.
Call 13 15 12 or visit lighandeasy.com.au today.
Target has all you need to keep your kids warm with a huge range of quality kids flannelette and fleece. Like these soft and snuggly Target Essentials fleece track pants for little kids, $8 each, and big kids just $12 each. All with an elastic waist for a comfortable fit. And these colourful Target Essentials print flannelette kids PJs from just $10 each, with brushed cotton for extra comfort and warmth. Exclusions apply. See in-store. Available in-store and online now at Target.
See you guys to Starbucks. Oh, and don't bring a thing.
Don't bring a thing.
Sweet.
We have to bring something.
We so do.
Hi, guys. How are you?
Cadbury favourites. What to bring when you're told not to bring a thing.
Sporty DNA is now even more evolved. The exhilarating Kazashi. Now with class-leading multimedia satellite navigation. Start your senses.
Welcome back to the program. We're joined this week by the new Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs and Multicultural Affairs, Matt Thistlethwaite, Richard Rowan Dean, a columnist with the Australian Financial Review, Richard Dennis, the Executive Director of the Australia Institute, and Liberal MP Kelly O'Dwyer. It feels like a lot longer ago, but it was only this week that the government reshuffled, or the Prime Minister reshuffled her front bench following a number of departures on Friday of last week after that botched leadership coup. Senator, you were one of the beneficiaries of the reshuffle, joining the ranks of Parliamentary Secretary. But we do now have the likes of Simon Crean, Chris Bowen, Martin Ferguson, Kevin Rudd, and others sitting on the backbench now. Is this Labor's best team on the front bench?
Well, these people have resigned from the front bench, and that's a decision that they've taken.
You think it was entirely their decision?
Well, you make your own decisions in politics, and
really?
they took these decisions. You know, they chose to support Kevin for the leadership. That didn't come off.
Except for Simon Crean, he was sacked.
Yeah, well, he did attempt to bring on a spill, so he laid his cards on the table that he wasn't supporting the Prime Minister anymore. So he's resigned. But the great beauty of our team at the moment is that there are people that are capable of stepping into the breach and taking on these portfolios. All of the members of the Cabinet that have taken on extra responsibilities have been cabinet level for quite some time, so they've got some serious experience in fact, the executive level of government in this country.
The people like Craig Emerson, for example, have been loaded with, and Anthony Albanese, super portfolios, really. In the case of Anthony Albanese, it's the same pile of portfolios that he held originally under Kevin Rudd, but nonetheless, it's a pretty hefty workload. And Craig Emerson now trade, tertiary education, the Asian Century White Paper. Can you really give attention to each of these areas that they deserve?
Well, I think they can, because they've got experience and deep experience at the executive level of government, and they've brought together portfolios that interrelate. Craig Emerson's got a serious background in economic policy. He was an advisor to Bob Hawke. He understands the significance of the link between education and the productivity with our economy and the importance for trade policy. In terms of Anthony Albanese's group of portfolios now, transport is intimately linked with regional development. So there's synergies there in the groupings of portfolios, and you've got the experience. It does, make it more productive, I think, in some respects, for some of these departments and ministers.
Rowan, what did you make of this?
Well, we now have a superior government in exile sitting on the backbenches, a more electable government in exile sitting on the backbenches, leaning over the novices' shoulders and wondering what's going to happen next. The Labor Party, the government, is split right down the middle. Ideologically, they're split in two. It's two separate parties, one beholden to sort of ideology, the other electable, but a sort of social democrat progressive party. They're on the backbenches, the ideologues are on the front benches. It's chaos, and yet again, the Australian people are the biggest losers out of this.
Richard, this issue about super portfolios, do you think it makes a difference in terms of government administration to have a couple of people with a lot of portfolio titles?
Oh, look, it obviously does, and I think Matt's right. To some extent, there are some synergies, and at the same time, they're going to be stretched. I think that however you divvy up your portfolios, you're either creating artificial distinctions between related topics, or you're pushing things together that don't really fit. So, no, but that's all governments have got that conundrum, and
But I don't think we've ever had a parliamentary secretary before for disabilities and water, which is what Amanda Ridgeworth is. I'm not not quite sure where the synergies are, but
no, this is my point. And then you've got the machinery of government. But look, I mean, at the same time, we see Tony Abbott on the news every night. But you know, there's talent in the Liberal Party like Kelly here, and I'm told that after the next election, it won't be her on the front bench, and it won't be Josh Freudenberg and a whole bunch of other people. It'll be Howard-era ministers who I haven't seen on television for 3 years.
Well, Kelly O'Dwyer, why aren't you on the front bench?
Well, can I just pick up first on a couple of points?
No,
it's a point about...
Here's your chance, Kelly. Pitch for the front bench.
It's a point about experience. You know, you were talking about the deep levels of experience that this new reshuffled, fifth reshuffle, by the way, Julia Gillard's fifth reshuffle of her best team that she's done in most recent times. And we don't have now one person who does have any real serious depth on that front bench. Not one person who sat around in the executive, in government, in cabinet with Hawke or with Keating, you know, leaving aside Howard and Costello in the subsequent governments, where we have got 16 ministers who are actually serving on our front bench at the moment. You know, the problem is not just with the leadership. I mean, what we saw with the reshuffle, it's not just a problem with leadership. When Simon Crean brought it on last week and when we saw all of those mass resignations that occurred subsequently from very senior members of the team like Martin Ferguson, like King Carr, they said that there was also a deep problem with the processes of government. They said there was a deep sickness in the cabinet, in the way that the government is making decisions. I don't think that has been fixed. There is deep divisions within the party. It's dysfunctional. I don't think these super portfolios, I don't think bringing together people who have been loyalists for the Prime Minister is going to deliver a better government for Australians. In fact, I think far from it. I think what we are going to see is poor decision-making continue. We have now seen the 6th small business minister appointed by this government.
Well,
we have had only one.
I don't think they referred to deep sickness, but they did talk about class warfare, a couple of them in particular. Is that a fair criticism?
No, I don't think it is at all. The Labor story is about aspiration. It's about providing low to middle income workers and families with the opportunity at a better life. So what that means is real income increases. And for the last 30 years in Australia, real incomes have been increasing, in stark contrast to what's been going on in the United States and Europe. And the best economic enabler that you can give someone is a job. And since coming to office in the wake of the global financial crisis, we've got one of the lowest unemployment rates in the world, and we've created 800,000 jobs. Now, that means that those families have an opportunity for their kid to get a better education than they have. That's the great aspirational goal of the Labor Party. It's been described as the light on the hill, and that's what we're about, and we're delivering that, and we do it through reform. So all the big challenges...
When we see some of Labor's elder statesmen, like Martin Ferguson and Simon Crean, raise this criticism when they're no longer bound by the strictures of being, you know, a part of the executive of government, saying, look, you know, this class warfare's really got to end. Are we meant to just ignore that? I mean, these people know what they're talking about.
Yeah, that's their view, but I reject it. And I reject it because the great Labor tradition is reform, and reform for the benefit of our economy so that people have opportunities. That was what the Hawke and Keating legacy was all about, wiping out some of the protection in industries, floating the dollar, opening up our economy. Look at the productivity benefits that have flowed from that. Look at the wealth of services that have been opened up to Australians. Many Australians that were low-income earners in those days couldn't get a bank loan. You couldn't buy your own home. Because of those reforms, now many Australians own their own home. The current challenges that we face, we've dealt with them in a reforming manner. Climate change. We've got a price on carbon. It's been talked about for 30 years in this country. Labor delivers it. Education reform. There's issues...
We're still waiting.
There's issues... but we're delivering. We're in the process of delivering. We've been talking about a national disability insurance scheme. No, we've been talking about a national disability insurance scheme since the Whitlam era. Yeah. Labor delivered it. It went through the Parliament.
You sat there and told us a story, but it's a fairy story. From go to woe, it's a fairy story. The real story of Labor in power for the last 6 6 years has been told by your own people. Dysfunctional, hatred, class warfare. You've borrowed $300 billion. That's how you've got your jobs and such. The country's never had debts like this. You have mortgaged our children's future.
Look, that is crazy. That is absolutely crazy.
You have mortgaged
our
the
level
future.
of debt is 10% of GDP.
You have been completely dysfunctional. You have trashed people's...
I completely reject.
Well, I'm sorry. That's the story that people out in the real world see. They see a dysfunctional government that is incapable of doing even the most basic things correctly.
We have the best performing economy in the Western world.
Thanks to John Howard and Peter Costello.
Come on. Our level of debt...
You've got to at least
our level of debt
is
is 10% of
GDP. You must
GDP.
acknowledge where we started.
The story was started...
that we actually had a $20 billion...
Okay, I don't want to... We only have a couple of minutes. I don't want to finish on this debt argument once again. But I do just want to nail down how confident you are that Labor will be unified, particularly this week, since that leadership issue was apparently put to bed, the real policy differences we've seen on show over superannuation in particular.
Well, I hope we will, and we need to be. We've got 5.5 months till the next election. We've got a good story to tell, I think. A good reforming Labor government that's delivering a better deal for working families in a whole host of areas. And if we're not united, we can't tell that story. A leak, a story about disunity, as you know, will always trump a story about a policy announcement. So we've got to get our act together. We know that. We know that. The Prime Minister said that last week was appalling. But I think now that, 11th hour to midnight, an election campaign coming up, we've got a good story to tell, and our MPs will get on with the job of doing that.
But do you not take any does the Prime Minister not take any responsibility for that dysfunction? I mean, this to me is the most fascinating thing. Of her cabinet, half of them have now gone. Surely the buck ultimately does stop with the Prime Minister.
Just quickly,
John Howard lost 8 of his ministers, I think, in his first year.
We're talking about half the cabinet.
So people leave in politics for various reasons. What is important is we've got a hung parliament, and Labor is still delivering reform. We're getting those laws through the parliament.
I think the reason these guys all left was pretty obvious, but we're going to have to wrap it up on that note. I'd like to thank Matt Thistlethwaite, Rowan Dean, Richard Dennis, Kelly O'Dwyer. Thank you very much. Thanks for your company as well. Have a great Easter. We'll see you this time next week. Bye for now.